بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل وألهمنا رشدنا يا رب العالمين. Alhamdulillah, after looking at the introductory investigations related to the work and its importance, and then after looking at the author's introduction, where he laid out the method of this text and its sources, he begins with Kitab al-Tahara. And Tahara begins with the rulings of Wudu. So, he says Kitab al-Tahara. Now, in both commentaries, there are some useful discussions related to why Tahara comes first, right? Because in general, in the books of fiqh, the ibadat come before the mu'amalat, right? Why? As al-Haskafi says in his commentary, ihtimaman bisha'niha, because the acts of worship are more significant because that's what we were created for. Right? And logically, you would put the most important act of worship first, which is the prayer. But, so he says, وَالصَّلَاةُ تَالِيَةٌ لِلْإِيمَانِ. The importance of prayer is immediately after the importance of faith itself. وَالطَّهَارَةُ مِفْتَاحُهَا. And Tahara is its key. بِالنَّص. By the explicit texts. Right? And there are some useful things in there. Imam, about halfway down the page, just above where it says Kitab al-Tahara, Imam al-Haskafi in his commentary mentions the word Tahara in the Arabic language. Tahara comes from Tahara. And you can say Tahara with a fatha, or you can say Tahura with a dhamma, and Tahira with a kasra. It's muthallath. Right? And they have the meaning of nadafa, of cleanliness. And Imam al-Haskafi gives a technical definition of tahara as well, which is النظافة من حدث أو خبث. It's the state of cleanliness from ritual impurity, hadath, or khabath, or physical impurity. Right? And this is actually, Imam al-Haskafi gives you the summary of many discussions. Amongst the mutaakhirin, there's a discussion that tahara, if you consider what you are responsible for, they say tahara is raf'ul hadathi or al-khabath. There's different ways, and you can see this in Tahtawi on the Maraqi, for example. That is tahara relating to the action of the one morally responsible. So it is to lift the state of ritual impurity or to lift the physical impurity. Right? Or is it the hasil min al-fi'l, the result of it, which is the cleanliness, which is al-nadafa, al-hasila, yani ba'd al-hadath. And the reason that this definition was chosen by Imam al-Haskafi is, imagine if somebody went to sleep in a state of janaba and by the swimming pool, and there came Brother Shafi and Sidi Abdul Latif, and they threw this person into the swimming pool. The person woke up swallowing water, and they breathed in water, and they came out of the swimming pool, and they realized they have 2 minutes left for dhuhr. Did they have to make ghusl? No, because it's the nadhafa al-hasila, right? It's the state of cleanliness, right? You don't have to engage in it yourself. That's a normal case. Anyways, that's a subtlety. Imam al-Haskafi does a breakdown of a whole bunch of things that are quite useful. I won't go into them, of its sabab and its hukum, etc. These are beautifully discussed in Maraq al-Falah. So sabab al-wujub and sabab al-iftirad and this, shart al-sihha, shart al-wujub, etc. They are discussed early on in the Maraqi. You can see them there. I won't go into them. And likewise, but Sheikh Zada has a number of useful discussions there, but then the text begins, right? Quite abruptly, right? Kitab al-Tahara, qala Allahu ta'ala. Allah Most High says, يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا قمتم إلى الصلاة فاغسلوا وجوهكم وأيديكم إلى المرافق وامسحوا برؤوسكم وأرجلكم إلى الكعبين. So he quotes the Quranic verse. And this is unusual, right? But this is one of the habits of the ulama, that even though the mutun were not written to give evidences, but in the beginning they come with the Quranic said, this is where these rulings come from, right? We're telling you in the beginning, this is where they come from. وَقِسْ عَلَى ذَلِكَ, and then apply the same principle. What the rulings were summarized, we're giving you the summary from. These are the rulings derived from the nusus nusus of the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Imam al-Quduri began his Mukhtasar in the same way, as did many others. Right? Right? Now, there are a number of things related to the Quranic verse, right, that we can mention in passing. One of them is that it is very beneficial to read the tafsir of these verses, right? To read the tafsir of these verses, of this verse, ayat al-Tahara. So we'll share 3 resources related to that. Take of them as much as you can. One is from Imam al-Aini's commentary on Sahih al-Bukhari, Umdat al-Qari. See, do you still have that? Yeah. Of specifically his explanation of Ayat al-Tahara. Okay. So we'll dig it up inshallah, promptly. And he gives a nice explanation. The second is from الضياء المعنوي في شرح مقدمة الغزنوي. مقدمة الغزنوي is one of the good muqaddimat on أحكام الصلاة, and it has a number of commentaries. One of the greatest of them and most expansive is الضياء المعنوي في شرح مقدمة الغزنوي. And it has a lot of fawaid. It's not a reference for fatwa, but Ibn Abdin and others quote from it frequently, and it's very, very beneficial. And he has a beautiful explanation of Ayat al-Tahara. The third is the opening of Ibn Abdin's explanation of Ayat al-Tahara and what Imam al-Haskafi has to say about it, because Ayat al-Tahara has a few interesting things. One of them is that the Ayat al-Tahara was revealed in Medina by near agreement of the Mufassirin. Was the Prophet ﷺ making wudu for prayer before the verse was revealed? Yes. Were the Sahaba making wudu before prayer, before the verse was revealed? Yes. ما صلى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم صلاة قط إلا على طهارة. Rather, we know in the Sahih that when the Prophet ﷺ came down from the mountain, after revelation came, Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salam came to him and showed him, he struck his wing against a rock and water gushed forth, and he demonstrated to him and instructed him in wudu and in prayer. So the ruling was already established. Then why would the verses come? Right? And this is something that is discussed on page 9 of Majma al-Anhur in the margin by Imam al-Haskafi. He says, as you can see, he says, ثُمَّ مَنْقُولُ الْمَذْهَبْ أَنَ الْوُضُوءَ فُرِضَ بِمَكَّةِ. And you can see, right? And he quotes the discussion on that it was already legislated. So why would it be, if they already knew the obligation of wudu and how to make wudu, then why would the verse be revealed? Right? So he mentions at the bottom of the page, وَفَائِدَةُ نُزُولِ الْآيَةِ تَقْرِيرُ الْحُكْمِ الثَّابِتِ. The benefit of the revelation of the verse is to affirm the ruling, is to confirm the ruling that is established. Number one. And there's a number of other points that are mentioned by Ibn Abdin in the beginning of his Hashia. Same discussion. We can share it from the Bulaq edition. We can just share that and label it. And that may be advanced for some of you, but there's many wisdoms in it. Right? There's many wisdoms. Why? Because the Quranic verse is qati'u thubuti wa dilala, is decisive. But it also brings out numerous rulings. The verse it brings out the i'jaz, at-tashri'i, the inimitable miracle, inimitable legislative marvel of the Quran, that all the rulings of tahara and their legal and spiritual aims, all of them are contained in this verse, with numerous other adab and so on. Some of the Maghribi scholars said there's over 800 rulings that can be deduced from Ayat al-Tahara. And it's not such a long verse. So that's why it's good to pause and reflect. And these readings that we've given, some of them may be advanced for you right now, but these are and of course the verse also has other aspects of indication that we won't go into. One of the things that's in it is there's something implicit, right? There's something necessarily implicit. Because what the verse literally would entail is إِذَا قُمْتُمْ إِلَى الصَّلَاةِ, if you stand for prayer, فَاغْسِلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ. Literally, we would have pots of water. So when you stand to pray, make wudu. But something necessarily implicit, which is وَأَنْتُمْ مُحْدِثُونَ. If you wish to pray and you don't have wudu, then do this. And that's understood, and that's how it was explained by Ibn Abbas and others, and that's one of the tafsir discussions related to the verse. It used to be that until the revelation of this verse, the Prophet ﷺ, the Sahaba used to make wudu for every prayer. Right? And when these verses revealed the dispensation of tayammum, right? That's why it's related that Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu said to his daughter, she lost her ring. So it got delayed, etc. So some people were upset, including Sayyidina Abu Bakr, but then these verses came and a great set of dispensations arose. Can you just close them? There's someone's video is on. If you can just close it. Right. So there's a lot of background, to the verse that is very instructive. But what is the reason the verse is mentioned here is because it contains all the ahkam of wudu, number one. And the rest of the verse, it also highlights ghusl and tayammum, etc. after. So he says, rahimahullah ta'ala, فَفَرْضُ الْوُضُوءِ غسل الأعضاء الثلاثة ومسح الرأس. So the obligation of wudu is washing the three limbs and wiping the head. Right? Washing the three limbs, الأعضاء الثلاثة, which أعضاء? Which أعضاء? What is the al here? What's the al here? Yeah, it's al-lil-ahd. Al-a'dha' al-madhkura fi al-ayah. Right? وَمَسْحُ الرَّأْسِ. And he puts it in this way, وَمَسْحُ الرَّأْسِ. And wiping the head, because he'll mention to us the difference about the extent of wiping the head. So he doesn't, now the mutun don't define key terms. Now one of the things, of course, we need to know the definition of the fard. And by now you should know it, but you can find a very useful definition of the fard in Majma al-Anhur, right? That al-fardu lughatan al-qat'u wa-taqdir. Farada, right, is to cut something off, like it is cut off. This is what it is. It's clearly delineated. Right? But the technical, definition he gives as well. ما ثبت لزومه بدليل قطعي. That is that whose requirement is established by a decisive text. لا شبهة فيه, in which there is no shubha, there is no interpretive possibility. Right? Leaving it is worthy of punishment, and the one denying it is susceptible to potential disbelief. And that's the one who denies it if this fard is مما علم من الدين بالضرورة. Not every fard entails, not every fard would entail kufr, right? But it's very dangerous to deny a fard, because there are furud that are differed upon ultimately within Islam, and there are things that are fard, but that people don't know are fard. And he also gives a definition of wudu, and wudu is a beautiful term because from wada'a, right, which is radiance, al-husn, right, wal-nadara, and also an-naqawa, from cleanliness, right, and wudu cleanses, beautifies, and makes one radiant spiritually, right? And so here, some of the commentators objected to this expression, وَمَسْحْ الرَّأْسِ, and wiping the head. Why? Because Imam Ibrahim al-Halabi puts, and wiping the head is the obligation to wipe the head? No. Okay. So that's just a technicality. So, right? So, but it's an issue. Because if you just read it there, you would think that wiping the head is fard, but it's not. So there's a few ways to understand that. You say, a مسح الرأس, a مسح للرأس, a مسح معهود للرأس. It's and wiping off the head, meaning a particular wiping of the head, which I'll be discussing. Okay. Maulana, one of the things to catch here is you should catch the definition of washing and wiping, right? And al-Haskafi gives definitions of both. You can take those. It's hard to beat Imam al-Haskafi's definitions. Imam al-Haskafi must have lived in a time when ink was very expensive in Damascus because he uses limited words, right? But wiping in the Arabic language, right, has mash typically is yani imrarul yad ala shay', right? That's the lexical meaning, right? Right? It's to pass one's hand over something, right? But the legal sense, he puts it very really precisely. He says, "Isabatul billatil udu." Ya salam, right? It's for the moisture. It's for moisture, for wetness. The billah, right? From which you have balal, wetness. For wetness to reach the limb. However it reaches it. You don't have to wipe. Because what is sought is not wiping, but that أن يكون ليس إيقاع المعنى لكن الحاصل من المعنى. It's what results from the meaning. And that's just for the sake of precision. So same guy. So Sidi Jacob was sleeping by the pool. The day after they threw him in the pool, he was sleeping. And then he woke up. And he was actually awake. But they decided to hit him with a wet towel. Wake up. And they hit him with a wet towel, and the wet towel hit his head. And you realize there's only 2 minutes for Dhuhr. These guys didn't wake him up. Is his head already wiped? Yes. Because the wetness reached the thing. Now, if you can wipe it anyways, you'll be fulfilling the sunnah of doing the specific actions. Anyways. And he also defines ghasl. Right after he says, وَالْغَسْلُ إِسَالَةُ الْمَاءِ مَعَ التَّقَاطُرِ. And ghasl, washing, is for water to flow over with dripping. Right? Meaning in normal conditions, the water would have dripped. And Imam al-Haskafi puts other points of benefit. We won't mention them. So water to flow over the limb, right? With no perceptible barrier. No perceptible barrier. The commentaries on the Hidaya and others point out here that a non-perceptible barrier, though there is something between the wetness, the water and the skin, does not prevent. Such as oil. Oil is a barrier. Oil is a barrier. If you looked carefully, you don't even need a microscope. Oil is a barrier, but it's not considered to prevent. As opposed to a clearly perceptible barrier, like paint or the like. Right? Okay. And he gives a definition of al-wajh. Wal-wajhu, returning to the text, wal-wajhu ma bayna qusas al-sha'r, and qusas is muthallath. What do they mean by muthallath? That all three harakat apply. You say qusas al-sha'r, qasas al-sha'r, and qisas al-sha'r. Right? ما بين قصاص الشعر وأسفل الذقن وشحمة الأذنين. So that's the face, right? From where the hair, from the hairline, and this is جريا على الغالب, from the normal hairline. Both commentators here say ولو قال, like al-Haskafi says, ولو قال من مبدأ سطح الجبهة, he says from the beginning of the top of the forehead, it would have been superior. Right? But you don't have to keep correcting people, it's wrong. That's why he said, well, it would have been better. So the way we explain text is say, من مبدأ سطح الجبهة, what do you say? من قصاص الشعر غالبا. Like from the general, most people, their forehead ends, where the forehead, there's a flat area, and then it starts bending. And that's typically where the hair grows from. So that's the general case. وَالْأَحْكَامُ تُبْنَى عَلَى الْغَالِبِ, and rulings are based on the general case. And then after that, there's the exceptions. So the two definitions are the same. It's just a matter of which one is more precise. وأسفل, and the bottom of the chin, this is lengthwise. وشحمتي الأذنين, and from earlobe to earlobe. And the limits don't enter, per se. Right? So everything between this has to be washed, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ascribed ghasl, washing, to the wajh. And the wajh is delineated in this way. So what are the consequences? He tells us. فَيَفْرُضُ غَسْلُ ما بين العذار والأذن. So therefore, it is obligatory to wash what is between the sideburns and the ear. Right? خلافا لأبي يوسف, as opposed to Abu Yusuf. Right? Because Abu Yusuf said that once the beard grows, then what is beyond it would be excused, which is this tiny strip. Right? And that gives a little bit of wusa for people who weren't. Now, if someone was not necessarily careful in the past, the way you deal with it is, what do you assume? Does anybody put like sticky tape here and make sure the water doesn't go there? No. Said, I'm not sure I washed it. I don't think I washed it. You assume validity and you ignore doubt. Right? So with respect to past practice, you assume validity and you ignore doubt. You're not sure that you didn't wash it. And water flows. If you got water here, where would the water go? It goes down. Water goes down and it spreads. So you assume that it went. If you got the water till the sideburn, like how much further is it? So you assume validity. And you exercise caution going forward. And then he says, so you have to wash that area. خلافا لأبي يوسف والمرفقان والكعبان يدخلان في الغسل. And both elbows and both ankles enter in the washing. Right? Now, Imam Ibrahim al-Halabi mentions the khilaf of the Sahibain. Correct? But on this point, there's a khilaf of Imam Zufar. Right? Imam Zufar, also great student of Imam Abu Hanifa, one of the mujtahid students of Imam Abu Hanifa, said that the limits don't enter. That's why he mentions this but doesn't mention the khilaf. Which is why and Imam Ibrahim al-Halabi is dealing with the expressions of the mutun, right? So he puts it in this way, but if you look at the Kanz and the Tanweer, here the Tanweer chose ma'al. He says, al-yadayn ma'al mirfaqayn. Ghaslu al-yadayn ma'al mirfaqayn. Washing the hands with the elbows, meaning up to and including. Wa ghaslu al-rijlayn ma'al ka'bayn. And washing the feet with, meaning up to and including, just for the purpose of clarity. And there's some discussion about the limits entering or not entering. How do we know that it enters? Right? So one way it's ijma. They argued there's ijma. And the fi'l of the Prophet ﷺ, etc. Others said no. In Arabic usage, there's two types of limit. There's ghayat imtidad. There's a limit. When you say ila, to, when there's a meaning and you stretch that meaning to a point, this is called ghayat imtidad. You take a meaning. Like, الصوم الصيام يكون من دخول وقت الفجر إلى المغرب. Right? Siyam, what does it mean? To refrain. So you refrain, you extend the meaning, imtidad, to Maghrib. So does Maghrib enter into the meaning? No. But then there's ghayat isqat. There's a limit that cuts off what is beyond it. So the yad, in Arabic, what does it refer to? The yad refers to the whole arm. اغسلوا أيديكم. The yad refers to the whole arm. إلى المرافق. To the elbow. So this is called غاية إسقاط. A cutting limit. غاية إسقاط. When the cutting limit, the end point enters. And they give proofs and so on in the commentaries on the Hidaya. And this, al-Haskafi puts it, this comes up in Maulana Sheikh Zada's briefly. And even though the author of al-Bahr al-Ra'iq didn't like this whole discussion, he said, look, there's ijma', don't discuss all of this. But if you look at it, to be fair, this was discussed by the great early Hanafi authorities and so on, and there is benefit because you appreciate points of Quranic usage, etc. Al-Haskafi, Ibn Nujayn just wanted to close the door on people getting confused. They said, look, there's ijma' that it enters. Now there's argument about the ijma' that Zufar's opinion does exist. So the ijma' has some kalam around it, that the opinion of Zufar does exist. Right? So that da'wah al-ijma' is a bit difficult to accept. So if someone did make mistakes in the past, Sheikh Adib Kallas, rahmatullahi ta'ala, I saw him multiple times and I asked him explicitly as well. He would point to the position of Imam Zufar that it is sufficient to لإسقاط القضاء, to lift qada. Now if someone were to make qada, now in itself it's better to assume validity. You're not sure whether you washed or not. What do you assume? You washed your elbows, you washed your ankles. But anyways, now no one can act upon it by choice. But لإسقاط القضاء يكفي. Wallahu a'lam. And then he says, ففرض, so he says, والمفروض في مسح الرأس قدر الربع. And the obligation in wiping the head is the extent of a quarter. وقيل يجزئ وضع ثلاث أصابع. Another opinion is it's sufficient to place 3 fingers on the head. Right? And there's a number of opinions regarding this. Another is قدر الناصية, مقدار الناصية, the extent of the front of the head. And the opinions are reasonably close because you can practice. You can put your hand on the top of your head, 3 fingers. Right? So the argument that it's 3 fingers is that ما هو الممسوح به, what do you wipe with? The hand. The least that would be considered wiping with the hand is to wipe with most of it, which is the extent of 3 fingers. Because someone who wipes with 2 fingers would not, someone who wipes with 2 fingers, you would not say he's wiping with his hand. If you just wipe with 2 fingers, fingers without the raha, without the palm, you wouldn't say they're wiping with their hand, they'd be wiping with 2 fingers. But with 3 fingers, this idea of للأكثر حكم الكل. Right? And lughatan, they discussed it out. So That's one opinion. وَامْسَحُوا بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ. Right? Wipe with your hands. But the problem with the three fingers opinion is that simply placing your hand is not considered to be wiping, lughatan. Right? Because wiping is, lughatan, has the meaning of imrar. وَلَوْ بِأَدْنَى حَرَكَةٍ, is to move, even if it would be with the slightest of motion. So, the miqdaru nasiya, the nasiya is the front of the head, is taking the argument that the verse is mujmal. The Quranic verse is non-detailed about how much you wipe. And the bayan, the explanation, comes in the hadith. And that's the hadith of al-Mughira ibn Shu'bah radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, where it's come, and the Nabi, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, masaha nasiyatahu, or ala nasiyatihi, that he wiped the front of his head. And the hadith, although al-Quduri and following him, Sahib al-Hidaya, joined between two different narrations of from al-Mughira ibn Shu'bah as one, but they're, in terms of transmission, they're two separate texts. You can see it in the opening of Quduri. So that's where the opinion of a nasiya comes. But the tahqiq, and al-Haskafi mentions this, and al-Haskafi discusses this out in his Khaza'in al-Asrar, which was the basis, the work he started writing initially, and then he decided, no, it's going to be too long, no one's going to read it. No one really reads it, but it's full of asrar. Even though the Durr al-Mukhtar is summarized from it, but you find durar in the Durr that are not in the Khaza'in, even in the part that he wrote of the Khaza'in. But there's, in the Durr itself, he keeps pointing to Khaza'in al-Asrar, and he points to it here as well. But the tahqiq is, and the ulama of usul have mentioned, that the verse, we understand that the quarter is a fard amali, and it's understood from the verse itself. And those of you who, for example, do bother reading, the argument of the verse being mujmal is made by Mullah Ali al-Qari, for example, in FBI, Fath Bab al-Inaya. But it's, and some of the hadith-oriented scholars, and he's certainly one of them, took that tack, but the tahqiq, and as argued by Imam al-Haskafi and by the great scholars, the greatest scholars of the madhab before him, is that the verse itself indicates a quarter. Why? وَامْسَحُوا بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ. And he puts, right, that, if you see on the top of the page, he says, لأن التحقيق أن الناصية أقل من الربع. The front of the head is less than a quarter. Number one. It's not the same. Right? كما حررناه في الخزائن. ثم أكثر النحاة أن الباء في الآية للإلصاق. The ba has a number of meanings in Arabic, but مسح, ilsaq, is to وَامْسَحُوا بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ. The ba is here, is for wiping with. Because they say الباء إذا دخلت, الباء, when you use the ba with the مسح, الأصل أنها تدخل على الآية, على الآلة. The ba is used, wipe with. Right? So the verse is as if saying, على ما يفهم, وَامْسَحُوا بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ, wipe with your heads. What do you wipe with your heads, so to speak? What? As if it's saying, وَامْسَحُوا بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ أَيْدِيَكُمْ. Wipe with your heads, your hands. Right? So if you place your hand, or most of it to be legal, 3 fingers, وَامْسَحُوا بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ. And if you place your hand on the head, and move it very slightly, where do you get to? You get to the middle of your head. So the least that would be considered, وَامْسَحُوا بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ, would be a quarter of the head. So that's the taqdeer bil-ruba, is taken from the ayah. Place your hands on the head, wipe with your heads, your hands. That's a taqdeer. So the quarter is understood from that. Imam Shafi'i understood tab'eed, wipe, بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ وَامْسَحُوا بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ في أدنى المسح. He took the ba to be للتبعيد, partitive. But most of the grammarians dismiss that, and the discussion on that is elsewhere, right? And that's why the huruf are so important. Anyways, that's a closed discussion now. The ijtihad has taken place. Now, with respect to the past, same thing applies. Someone, if they said we were Hanafi, but in the past I used to only wipe a little of my head, you can take a rukhsa from another madhab within an act of worship to validate your action, لإسقاط القضاء. That's also from the position of Shaykh Adib, right? And others as well, right? That you cannot make talfiq in actions now, but you can take from different madhab positions li isqat al-qada. We asked Shaykh Adib explicitly about that. Right? So if someone, like a sister says she was Hanafi, and she always did but she only wiped a little bit of her head, okay, your wudu is valid according to the Shafi'i school, or in this position is valid in the Shafi'i school to wipe over a little, right? And if someone wants to be more strict, ahlan wa sahlan, but this is what من هو أعلم منا وأتقى وأحوط said. Okay. Now, المأمور به هو المسح what's understood in the verse is what? وَامْسَحُوا بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ. What is the وسيلة المسح? It's the yad. Right? Right? So he says ولو مد أصبعا أو أصبعين لا يجوز أي لا يصح. If one wipes only with one finger or two for the area, it is not valid in our madhab. Okay, it would be valid in the Shafi'i school because the least would be valid in his madhab, but in our madhab it would not be valid. So again, if someone did this in the past, there is leeway, but in our madhab it's not valid. Of course, if you used, how many fingers is this? How many fingers is this? Anyone? How many fingers is this? It's 3 fingers. One finger, it's the extent of 3. 1 finger, 2 fingers, and the thumb is a finger. Right? This is at least as big as the thumb. Right? So if someone wiped like this, that's 3 fingers. Right? So these are things that you don't get into waswasa, etc. So you wipe with most of the hand, the extent of 3 fingers or more. Right? And we'll see the sunnah way of wiping. So that's why he mentions this. And then are you following the slides? Go to the next one, please. Here. Can we go here, please? Okay, Bismillah. Okay, now when it comes to, so that's the extent of wiping the head, right? The relied upon position is a quarter for the reasons mentioned. If someone did slightly less than a quarter, there are opinions within the madhab that would validate that, but this is the asah in the madhab, the more correct opinion within the madhab, right? But he mentions the others because they have been affirmed. Right? And we looked at the discussion on Tahtawi. Now, the next point is, what does one do with the beard? What does one do with the beard? So he said, let's read what he says first. He says, وَيُفْرَضُ مَسْحُ ربع اللحية في رواية والأصح مسح ما يلاقي البشرة. And that's another opinion. So how much of the beard must be washed or wiped in wudu? There are overall 6 opinions, depending on how you slice and dice the issue. There are various narrations. Because the possibilities are, you wash the whole area, or you either wash the beard or wipe the beard. You wash the whole thing or a quarter of it. And then there are other opinions, but these are the 4 main ones. Wash or wipe, the whole thing, or a quarter of it. And ittifaqan is within what is the face. Mastarsala min ash-sha'r, what goes beyond the chin, لا يجب غسله ولا مسحه اتفاقا بل يسن. It's recommended or sunnah to wipe it. Okay. There's one narration that you wipe a quarter of it. Right? So you wash the face and a quarter of the beard would be sufficient to just wipe. Wetted hand, wipe. That's it. You don't have to get water through it. And some did choose that. But there is major ikhtilaf on this point. As late as 956 Hijri, Ibrahim al-Halabi, a great muhaqqiq, chose that you wipe the beard. You wipe the beard. You don't have to wash it. Washing it is to make the water flow over it. Right? On the zahir of the lihya. However, the author himself, right? The author himself, in his Sharh al-Saghir, because he has this terminology, Imam al-Haskafi, when he points to Ibrahim al-Halabi, in his Sharh al-Kabir, he calls him al-Mu'allif, and he points to him in the Sharh al-Saghir, he calls him al-Musannif, correct? So Ibrahim al-Halabi, in his Sharh al-Saghir on Munyat al-Musalli, himself took another position, right? Which is, he said this is the position of Qadi Khan. And Qadi Khan's a big deal. The reason it's useful to know this is that if somebody is sure, like, they only use very little water, and they wash their face, and they wouldn't get their beard wet, and then they just took a wetted hand and did their beard, would we say their wudu is invalid? No, it's a qawl musahhah in our madhab. It's a validated opinion. Till late in the madhab, Ibrahim al-Halabi says this is the more correct opinion. It's asah. And he references to Qadi Khan. What do they say about Qadi Khan? لا يفتى بخلاف Qadi Khan. was this mubalagha, that we don't give fatwa contrary to Qadi Khan. Qadi Khan was, like the name indicates, is a big deal. Right? One of the greatest of the mutaakhirin, died late in the 6th century, a contemporary of al-Marghinanis. Right? However, Ibrahim al-Halabi himself, in his smaller Sharh on the Munya, says, وَأَظْهَرُ الرِّوَايَاتِ عَنِ الْإِمَامِ. You can see this at the bottom of page 11 in Haskafi's commentary here. Right? He says, وَأَظْهَرُ الرِّوَايَاتِ عَنِ الْإِمَامِ فَرْضُ غَسْلِ مَا يُلَاقِي الْبَشَرَ وَعَلَيْهِ الْفَتْوَى كَمَا فِي الظَّاهِرِيَّةِ. But the most evident opinion of Imam Abu Hanifa is that you must wash the outer part of the face, outer part of the beard, and that's the fatwa position. Right? And Ibn Abdin explains it, al-Haskafi explains it, and this is what was taken by other great muhaqqiqeen like Imam Ash-Shurunbulali in Nur al-Idah in the Maraqi. And this is what you find was, al-Haskafi took it, and that was taken, by, that's the mu'tamad of the madhab, that because the command is to wash the face. And you wash the face by washing the skin. If the beard hair is thin, then you must still wash the skin. But if the beard is thick, then you wash the beard, the outer part of the beard. Because al-ma'mur bihi huwa, the hukum applying to the face is ghasl. Now there's a reasoning why there's a distinction made, and it has to do with muwajahah, etc. You can read about it in the various places, including the Bada'i', but even the Bada'i' basically takes this position. It's mentioned. So, the relied upon position is, here it's important to note, because what's in the matn is not relied upon, right? The more reliable position, and it's also the more cautious opinion, but is to wash the beard, right? Within the circumference of the face. What is beyond the boundaries of the face, it is sunnah to wash. And the beard is thin, you must wash the skin. You can see the details in Nur al-Idah. So that is these are the obligatory acts of wudu and some of the details related to them that we wanted to detail out a little bit. Any questions here before we proceed? Go ahead.
In the verse on Tahara, we take the linguistic meaning of ghasl, but why do we diverge from the linguistic meaning of masr, which is to wipe with one's hand, and the meaning that you explained?
We don't diverge from the linguistic meaning because the masdar, what does it indicate? Like mash. No, but what about the action? Right? The masdar can indicate إيقاع الفعل أو الحاصل من الفعل. Right? It can indicate doing the action or the result of the action. So, and the way the fuqaha conclude it is, what if you didn't use your hands? Right? That, let's say somebody had long sleeves, like let's say my sleeves are long, and they didn't use their hand. They didn't use their hand, they used their sleeve. Would it be valid? No. And you could do, by analysis, other things. Because there's other furu' where they talk about that. Do you have to do the washing yourself? Like, غسل, like you say, غسل زيد ثوبه. Right? Zayd washed his garment. أي أوقع معنى الغسل على الثوب. Right? He did the washing. Right? But if you say غسل الثوب, this, right? The thobe was washed. Does it necessarily entail somebody washed it? No. حصل له هذا المعنى. Right? It's not necessarily a person did it. You put it out and it rained. So that's the حاصل من الفعل. And this kind of the legal theory behind it, and you can see in so many furu', they come up with all kinds of different potential perspectives. There also comes up in tayammum. Like, do you have to hit, although there's the hadith, التيمم ضربتان, ضربة للوجه وضربة لليدين. Tayammum is 2 strikes. What if you didn't use hands? What about the person who whose hands are burnt? Could they use something else? Right? By doing what if scenarios, you come to the conclusion, and you also find athar from the Salaf and so on that confirm this. And those are the kinds of mental exercises that Abu Hanifa practiced out with his students. That's why he said, رَفَعْتُ التَّعْبَ عَنْ أَصْحَابِي. Right? You find all kinds of furu', but they have practical considerations. So that's, and you want details, you can dig and you can find. Okay. Then we'll look at the sunnah actions. Now, there are 4 aspects of the sunnah meaning. First, right, there's the meaning of sunnah in the Arabic language. Right? A sunnah is الطريقة المسلوكة خيرا كانت أو شرا. The general meaning of sunnah in Arabic is a way that is followed, a way that is pursued, even by one person. It could be good, it could be bad. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about sunnat al-awwaleen, the way of those before you, in a negative light. And in this sense of the usage of sunnah in the Arabic language, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man sanna sunnatan hasana." Whoever inaugurates a good sunnah, a good way that is followed, فَلَهُ أَجْرُهَا وَأَجْرُ مَنْ عَمِلَ بِهَا, has its reward and the reward of those who act upon it. وَمَنْ سَنَّ سُنَّةً سَيِّئَةً, and whoever inaugurates a bad way has its sin and the sin of those who act upon it. نسأل الله العافية. So that's one meaning of sunnah in a general sense in the language. But then there's a general religious meaning. When we say as-sunnah, we mean طريقة النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم, the way of the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم, right? It's obvious. عليكم بالسنة, follow my way. But in this general sense, it's not just follow sunnahs, right? Follow sunnahs, follow my way in a general religious sense. Then there's an usuli meaning of sunnah, right? Which is sunnah as source of law, right? Was a masdar al-tashri' al-thani. Because so as divided in usul, right? That الحكم إما أن يثبت بالوحي أم لا، وإن ثبت بالوحي فإما أن يكون وحيا متلوا فقرآن أو غير متلو فالسنة. Right? That the ruling can be established by revelation or not directly by revelation. If it's established by revelation, then it's either the recited revelation, which is Quran, or the non-recited revelation, which is the Sunnah. And if it's not directly established by revelation, then it's either established by analogy upon revelation, which is qiyas, or by the agreement of the people of ijtihad in any age, which is ijma. Right? And then there's derivative things which go back to these. Istihsan is a sub-branch of qiyas. The qawl al-sahabi is a branch of sunnah, etc., as seen in usul. Okay. The fourth sense of sunnah is the legal sense of sunnah, which is that which we are encouraged to do without obligation. That which we are encouraged to do without obligation. And that's divided into emphasized sunnah, which is the emphasized sunnah if leaving it is blameworthy, and recommended sunnah, which leaving it is not blameworthy. Right? The emphasized sunnah, if left, it is blameworthy. If left habitually, could be sinful, but less sinful than leaving a fard or a wajib. And so that's the legal sense. So the emphasized sunnah is that which the Prophet ﷺ, or the Sahaba emphasized to an extent that it's understood to be from the invariable practice of the Prophet ﷺ, and leaving it has been censured, right, without rendering it impermissible. Now there's another usage of sunnah, right, which is that the ulama divide the sunnahs in a different way into sunanul huda and sunanul ada. The sunnahs of guidance, and these are the central sunnahs of the religion. Right? And these are broadly analogous, this is a different usage, but they're broadly analogous to the emphasized sunnahs, or the key agreed upon emphasized sunnahs. Right? But there's more than one usage of the term sunanul huda. Right? So one usage of sunanul huda, the sunnahs of guidance, are the key emphasized sunnahs of the deen. Like the adhan, like the emphasized sunnah prayers, etc. Leaving which is leaving prophetic guidance. But there's another usage of sunanul huda, which is not the key emphasized sunnahs, but sunnah al-huda are the sunnahs related to religious matters. Right? And in that sense, it could encompass the recommended prayers, etc. They're sunan of huda. So in this usage, sunan al-huda could encompass both recommended and both emphasized and recommended sunnahs. But these are different usages, and you shouldn't get tied up in a knot about usages. Okay. So when it comes to the sunnah, we will share, inshallah, reading from Ibn Abidin about the definition of the sunnah from the Hashiyah. But and we'll share, inshallah, the main definition of the sunnah, inshallah, in English. But the sunnah, right, right? And the discussion in Haskafi here is good, but broadly, the Sunnah, the emphasized Sunnah, is that which the Prophet ﷺ did invariably, leaving only occasionally. ما واظب عليه النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم, right? What the Prophet ﷺ did invariably, or leaving only on occasion, right? In matters of guidance, in matters of guidance. And it may well be connected with warnings against leaving it, right? So it's the Sunnah Mu'akkada is established by Mu'adhabat al-Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, by the Prophet doing it invariably, or his doing it with warning against leaving it in matters of devotion. And right, so it's established by it being in matters of devotion, by either the mu'adhaba of the Prophet doing it inevitably, or the Prophet doing it and warning against leaving it. Or it was done by the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum, right? The senior Sahaba or the generality of the Sahaba. Because the Sunnah is established by their example, عَلَيْكُمْ بِالسُنَّةِ وَسُنَّةِ الْخُلَفَاءِ الرَّاشِدِينَ الْمَهْدِينَ مِنْ بَعْدِ, and many other evidences related to that. Here there's a beautiful work by Imam Abdul Hayy al-Laknawi on the definition of the Sunnah. It's called Tuhfatul Akhyar. بإحياء سنة سيد الأبرار. Just Google it. Imam Laknawi's work, and we'll share a link to it. You're not expected to read the whole thing, but Imam al-Laknawi goes through over 40 definitions of the Sunnah. But these are the main points that come out in the definition. Tuhfatul Akhyar بإحياء سنة سيد الأبرار. He does two main things. He defines what the Sunnah is, and that the Sunnah is also established by the practice of the companions. And then he discusses the issue of Taraweeh, and Taraweeh, the 20 rak'ahs of Taraweeh being Sunnah Mu'akkada. Okay. So that's the definition of the Sunnah. So we'll share the reading of Ibn Abdin on the Sunnah. There's many fawaid in it. So we're assuming at this level that you've covered the fiqh of ibadat properly. So he says, وَسُنَنُهُ غَسْلُ الْيَدَيْنِ إِلَى الرُّسْغَيْنِ نِبْتِدَاءً. The sunnahs are washing both hands up to the elbows, up to the wrists in the beginning. وَالتَّسْمِيَةُ, and beginning in the name of Allah. Right? And there's difference of opinion on the basmala. There's difference of opinion on the basmala as to whether it is sunnah mu'akkada, and that's the relied upon position, or it being recommended. And there are a number of Hanafi scholars who vacillated between the three opinions. Between it being, because there are some hadiths that meant between it being sunnah mu'akkada, which is the majority opinion in the madhab, or it being recommended, and it being wajib. It being wajib is a weak opinion in the madhab, right? Because there are some hadiths about there's no wudu without the basmala, but they're weak. And aslan, that's not mansoos from our imam, right? So that's the difference opinion on the basmala. there's a weak opinion that sometimes some scholars mention things like that, bahthan, that if the hadith were established, wouldn't it entail it being wajib? But they're not saying it is wajib, like al-Aini and others. The argument for it being recommended is the fact that many of the descriptions of the prophetic wudu don't mention the basmalah. But the response is he said it quietly. Right? So the relied upon position, it's a sunnah mu'akkada. Was-siwak, and brushing one's teeth. Right? And the siwak, right? And the siwak, what is meant by siwak is al-istiyak. Right? Is al-istiyak, is brushing one's teeth. Right? So Ibn Abdin and others make a rad of the taqdeer of it by isti'maluhu. Isti'mal al-siwak. But siwak refers to the ala or the amal. Right? 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 And right? So, and Shaykh Zada's explains that most of them interpret it as being isti'maluhu, isti'mal al-siwak, which is the oud. But again, it's a masdar. Siwak refers to either iqa'u al-fi'l or al-hasil min al-fi'l. But here what's meant is not the instrument, but the act. It's not the alat as-siwak. The siwak here refers to the ala or the fi'l. Right? Because and he explains that. Ibn Abdin takes that opinion as well. But using an actual toothstick is recommended. And it's the optimal way of fulfilling the sunnah. Sunnah is fulfilled by any brushing. Using the toothstick is optimal. And that's what great contemporary scholars mention as well. That you can find that in Dars al-Tirmizi of Mufti Taqi Usmani. That's related from Mufti Taqi Usmani and others. And that's what our teachers mention as well. Okay. And there are numerous hadiths on the merits of siwak. There are a number of distinguished Hanafi imams, amongst them Sahib al-Hidaya and Sahib al-Tabyin, as mentioned in by al-Haskafi, right? That وَصَحَّحَ فِي الْهِدَايَةِ وَالتَّبْيِينِ نَدْبَهُ, that the author of the Hidayah and author of Tabyin al-Haqa'iq, Sharh Kanz al-Daqa'iq, and the author of Fath al-Qadir, Ibn al-Humam, said that it's recommended. لكن المصنف قال قد عده الأكثرون من السنن وهو الأصح. But most of the scholars of the madhab have deemed it to be an emphasized sunnah, and that is the more correct opinion. And that's what practical religious caution entails. So practically, we should strive to keep a toothstick with us, especially if you leave the home, so you have something to brush your teeth with. Right? Okay. So there is nothing specific about the time of the siwak. Do you do it either at the beginning of the wudu, like you wash your hands, brush your teeth, and then rinse your mouth? Or do you do it during the rinsing of the mouth? There's nothing specific on that. And he says, وَغَسْلُ الْفَمِ بِمِيَاهٍ وَالْأَنْفِ بِمِيَاهٍ. Right? And to wash the mouth with multiple sets of water, i.e. three, and the nose with multiple sets of water. So this is the optimal, that you rinse the mouth 3 times and the nose 3 times. So you would use 6 sets of water. Right? So the sunnah is to rinse each one 3 times, with 3 separate sets of water. And you could minimally do it with And you would fulfill the sunnah by using only 3 sets of water. So the proper and optimal way is in the Hanafi schools to use 6 sets of water. 3 for the mouth, 3 for the nose. The sunnah is also fulfilled by using 3 sets of water. Mouth, nose, mouth, nose, mouth, nose. 3. The sunnah could also be fulfilled by using 4 sets of water. 3 for the mouth. Right? 1, 2, 3. And then you could conceptually do the nose with 3 times with 1 handful of water. And if you want to nerd it out, you can see that you could do the nose 3 times with 1 handful of water. Right? And if you want to take detail, Imam Tahtawi mentioned that these are 2 sunnah here. These are 2 sunnahs mushtamilatani ala 6 sunan. There are 6 sunnahs. Right? To wash both, to do at-tathlith, wat-tartib, to do it 3 times, to do it in order, wal-akhd bi-miya'in thalatha, wal-mubalagha fihima, wal-majj, and to exaggerate for other than the fasting person, and to cast out what you took in, etc. So there's multiple sunnahs. You can see them from Tahtawi on the Maraqi. We don't want to go into all the details here. Okay. And وَتَخْلِيلُ اللِّحْيَةِ وَالْأَصَابِعِ, and to interlace both one's beard after بعد تمام غسل الوجه, after washing the face completely, and interlacing the fingers, which is after بعد تمام غسل اليدين, after washing both arms. You interlace your fingers بالتشبيك, right, by interlacing. And this was the position of قيل هو في اللحية فضيلة عند الإمام ومحمد. And it said that according to Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Muhammad, interlacing the beard is a fadila, is good. Meaning it's generally recommended. But the position of Abu Yusuf, and it's not really clear what Abu Hanifa and Imam Muhammad said. Some said no, their position would entail that it is sunnah. So that's why. But it's generally related that they didn't hold it to be sunnah, as you can see in the Mabsut of Imam al-Sarakhsi. But Imam Abu Yusuf said clearly that it is sunnah mu'akkada to interlace the beard. The position of Abu Hanifa is not clear. There's an argument that his principles would entail it being sunnah. That's why the fact that Abu Hanifa doesn't necessarily, or Muhammad Ibn Hassan doesn't relate it clearly from Abu Hanifa that's a sunnah mu'akkada, does not entail it's not a sunnah mu'akkada. That's why there's taraddud. That's why he says qila. That it's not required, and that's his caution. However, if you look in the Mabsut of Imam al-Sarakhsi, he chose Abu Yusuf's position that it is sunnah mu'akkada to interlace the beard, and that's the mu'tamad in the madhab, and there's an argument that that is the position of Imam Abu Hanifa, and that's what Mawlana Ibrahim al-Halabi is pointing towards. وَتَثْلِيثُ الْغَسْلِ, and to wash 3 times, which is تَثْلِيثُ الْغَسْلِ الْمُسْتَوْعِبِ, to wash 3 complete times. You wash the face completely once, that's 1 washing. You wash the arm once completely, that's 1 washing. And you do it 3 times. Doing more than 3 is khilafus sunnah. Right? Doing more than 3 is khilafus sunnah. Unless you do it without, you weren't quite sure, so you just did 1 more, لِتَسْكِينِ الْقَلْبِ. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's not good to make it a habit. وَالنِّيَّةِ, and intention. Right? And intention. Right? Intention is not required in wudu because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not command it. And the wudu is just a wasila and shart. والعبرة في الوسائل والشروط بحصولها لا بتحصيلها. And what counts in means and conditions is that they be fulfilled, not that they be sought. That they be met, not that they be sought. Sidi, do you intend that your awrah is covered every time you pray? No. Is your prayer valid? Inshallah, yes. Because it's a condition. The condition has to be met. It doesn't have to be sought. Right? Now the hadith, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, though, one of the central hadiths, that hadith is ظَنِّيُّ الثُّبُوتُ وَالدِّلَالَةِ. Is ظَنِّيُّ الثُّبُوت because it's a singular transmission from Sayyidina Umar. Only Sayyidina Umar narrated it. And then it spread afterwards. And it's a great hadith, and you should read multiple commentaries on it. Great Imams like Imam al-Kafiyaji and his student Imam al-Suyuti and others wrote entire books on hadith إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالِ. And other great scholars, al-Qurani and others, wrote great commentaries on the hadith. And one should read the commentary on this noble hadith. Mulla Ali al-Qari in Mirqat al-Mafatih, etc. Right? And the hadith is also ظَنِّيُّ الدِّلَالَةِ because إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. Something is implicit. And a taqdeer is ضَرُورَةٌ فَيُقَدَّرُ الْأَقَلُّ. Actions are something. Right? الأعمال بالنيات. The بالنيات is متعلق بخبر محذوف. What is the khabar? We have to make taqdeer of it. So you make the taqdeer of the aqal. ثوابها وكمالها بالنية. Right? Anyways, and the Quranic verse is clear. If you wish to pray, do 4 things. The implication is, if you do these 4 things, you can now pray. Adding intention in it is زيادة على النص, is adding to the text. ولا يكون بخبر الواحد ولا بالنص الظني. Right? Etc. And that's our madhab. But at the same time, so the Hanafis are expansive about the intention in this way, but they also say that it is inconceivable. لا يتصور عادة أن يخلو فعل مختار عن نية. It is normally inconceivable that a willful action be free of intention. Right? You realize that Asr time came, you went into the washroom and you're thinking about the lighting. So why did you go to the washroom? So I actually needed to use the toilet. Then why did you wash your hands, your face, your hands, your face, your arms, your head, and then wash your feet? Well, I was making wudu. Exactly. So when you chose to do this action, you intended it. That's all the intention is. Right? The intention is not istihdar laqabin muayyan. It's not that you bring to mind a particular title. Right? Al-ibra bil-ma'na la bil-lafz. What counts is the meaning. So it is almost inconceivable, unless you fell into the swimming pool or something like that, and the thought of wudu didn't come, it's almost inconceivable that you didn't intend it. And that's something that you have to dispel waswasa about intention, but emphasize magnifying intention. Istihdaru niyya min kamal niyya. Bringing to heart the intention is from the completion of the intention. So one niyya, right? And we can share some of their related to niyya. There's the issue of ikhlasun niyya. And a text that we'll share as a recommended text is al-Hidaya al-Alaiya with the ta'liqat, with the footnotes of Shaykh Muhammad Sa'id al-Burhani, and that has a beautiful index at the back. And we can share what page the discussion on ikhlas is there, because there's a lot of investigations related to the intention, especially sincerity of intention and insincerity and so on. But the definition of intention is qasdu ta'a, right? Is the firm resolve to do an action. وَالتَّقَرُّبِ إِلَى اللَّهِ, and to draw normally a willful action, it's inconceivable that the qasdu ta'a is not there. But that's the shartu wujud al-niyyah. But the shartu thubut al-niyyah, but shartu thawab, the condition for reward is qasdu taqarrub ila Allah. What meanings of drawing closer to Allah are there? Right? وَإِنَّمَا لِكُلِّ امْرِئٍ مَا نَوَى, and each person shall have whatsoever they intended. So, a sunnah fi niyyah is i'dhamu niyyah, is to magnify one's intention. And one should not lose out on that in wudu. One should not lose out in that in prayer. One should not lose out in that in any action. Right? Right? كم من عمل, just because. وكم من عمل صغير عظمته النية, and how many a small act was made tremendous by the intention. The Prophet ﷺ said, لا تستحقرن من المعروف شيئا, don't deem anything of the good that you get. The reward is a unit that is multiplied tenfold minimally, and it lasts eternally. So it's an ERA, it's an eternal rate of investment. You can see we talked about it quite at length in the Maraq al-Falah classes, etc. You can review that. وَالتَّرْتِيبُ الْمَنْصُوص, and the order mentioned in the verse and detailed in the hadiths generally. But the ayah has the وَعَابُ الرَّأْسِ بِالْمَسْحِ, and to wipe the entire head. And the end of the head is the top of the ear. وَقِيلَ هَذِهِ الثَّلَاثَةُ, and it is said that these ended. And that is the argument ascribed to Imam al-Quduri. And most of the commentators on Quduri said that's what Imam al-Quduri is saying. We could actually check what Imam al-Quduri says in his Tajreed and elsewhere about explain that here where he says وَيُسْتَحَبْ, because in Quduri he says that these are recommended. This is لِلتَّأْكِيد. It's not saying that these are sunnah and these are merely recommended, meaning they're sunnah and recommended. Like how they explain when they say Hasan Sahih. It's not Hasan. These three are particularly emphasized sunnahs. Right? So much so that some of the madhabs, the jumhur hold, the other madhabs hold the intention to be obligatory. Right? The order, the Shafi'is consider it obligatory. Isti'ab al-Mash al-Ra's, the Malikis consider it wal-wila, and to perform the actions consecutively. Right? Wal-wila, and to do the actions in water of the head. Now this is one of the rare places where Mawlana al-Haskafi, it has to be pointed out, is not. Imam al-Haskafi puts وَلَوْ بِمَاءِ الرَّأْسِ, and wiping the ears with the same water. Followed some of the mutaakhirin like al-Zahidi and others who said that وَلَوْ أَخَذَ مَاءً جَدِيدًا لَكَانَ حَسَنًا. If you take fresh water to wipe the ears, it would be good. And this is also taken, like al-Haskafi, it was taken by al-Shrumbulali rahmatullahi alayhi, and this is to use the same water. Right? And actually here, Shaykh Zada is correct that the hadiths of taking fresh water are wiped your head and then you put the turban back on and then you don't have any wetness left. So you take fresh water. Right? So in our madhab, taking fresh water for the ears would be khilaf al-sunnah. One of the footnotes on Nur al-Idah, called al-Wishah, and you don't want to mention the author because he's a noble scholar. He misquotes Ibn Abidin, and it's remained in the edition for, I hope it's changed now, but it had remained for over 20. Recommended to begin with the right, and some, including a Shurumbula, is wiping the neck is recommended. It's not actually explicitly mentioned in Zahir al-Riwayah to wipe the neck, but it's understood from the recommendation of extending the wash. There are other recommended acts that you can review Nur al-Idah for, right? And if you have the capacity, you can look in Hashid ibn Abdin. And I have to stop